Hey everyone, geophysicist Stefan Burns here. There is an interesting tension that is building right now across the solar system. And this is across a variety of domains. First and foremost, there is some pretty significant planetary geometry that is currently active. We have Mars opposite Pluto, both of them square to the Sun. And in less than 24 hours, we have a new moon. So the moon will then slide in and conjunct the Sun, further activating that tense square planetary geometry, which this is the third time now that we've had this Mars-Pluto opposition. It's actually the final opposition, which generally means that it's going to be the release of that energy. There's a time window for that. Doesn't mean an event has to happen today for that, but this tension is building and will be active going into the middle of next week because Mars moves slowly, Pluto moves very, very slowly. And all this tension is also being fed by the Sun because we have these kind of opposite characteristics currently at play on the Sun. We have this really large coronal hole. We're getting the second pass of this high-speed stream soon with this larger region there of that coronal hole. Also this northern region kind of connected together as you see there. They are just now entering into the geoeffective position. We've already been in the high-speed stream, but it took a little bit of a dip as we went through this bottleneck right there. It should re-expand, but there's also a tremendous amount of sunspots on the Sun. And so we have a lot of sunspots clustered around these coronal holes, and they haven't been flaring that much, but in general, they emit a lot of X-ray light in just all parts of the light spectrum out into interplanetary space. And so this interacts with Earth in a variety of ways. This charges the global electric circuit. All that X-ray flux really heats up the ionosphere. But coronal holes typically pull the solar wind density back and allow for energy to kind of express itself from the Earth. And we often see really high magnitude earthquakes when there are very large coronal holes in the center to geoeffective position. So the two are kind of working opposite, because if you have a strongly ionized or charged up ionosphere, then you induce these really strong telluric currents in the crust. But often it's after that ionization occurs that you then get the coronal hole to sweep by with its high-speed stream, and then the energy releases. Because typically you'll get this coronal hole and you won't get that many sunspots around it. But now we have a lot of sunspots around it. So the two are kind of working opposite of each other. We've had 3 magnitude 6+ earthquakes, a 6.2, a 6.2, and a 6.3 in Ecuador yesterday, just off the coast. So we have had some magnitude 6 earthquakes pop off during this coronal hole high-speed stream, but nothing super significant yet. And that's not a guarantee, but we do have this tense planetary geometry active right now. And also we have this new moon locking into that configuration in less than 24 hours. So there is some interesting tension building right now. And we also have seen a very unusual burst in the Schumann resonances today out of Tomsk, Russia. So we will check that out. Let us go into our planetary geometry first, actually, because I mentioned that right at the beginning. It's probably the most active thing that's really speaking to tension building across the entire solar system, because this is going all the way out to Pluto. So let us check that out. We have Astro Dienst here, and we can just simply click up top right there to get our active chart of the moment. And this is geocentric. And we're not going to spend too much time talking about the signs. This is Western tropical astrology. So we're looking at the signs, not the constellations, the signs based off the seasons. I'm mainly focused on the angles right in this moment between these different planets and the Sun. Here's Pluto right there. And so we see that it is at 3 degrees and 48 arc minutes of Aquarius, again, Western tropical astrology, but Pluto is moving very, very slowly. Mars is starting to pick up speed, but we see that right now it's at 3 degrees and 40 arc minutes. So nearly perfectly opposite Pluto. The third opposition, the first one was November 3rd. The second one was like January 5th or so, January 4th, January 5th, right around that time zone. And now we have this third and final one. Mars will keep moving ahead because it's finished its retrograde. So it went like this, and conjuncted Pluto went back and then swept over it again. So this is that final sweep. It's going to move forward. But we see that right at this time, we have the sun there within about 2 degrees, 3 degrees, I guess. That's 6 degrees and 43 arc minutes. So yeah, 3 degrees square of both of them. And actually, in fact, we have Black Moon Lilith there as well, which is a little bit more of a fictional point, you could say, but carries a lot of energy to it. So we do technically have a grand cross there if we include Lilith. But if we look at just our 3 points here, we see that we're working all the way from the innermost part of the solar system with the sun, our big heavyweight, to the first planet outside our orbit, which is Mars, going all the way to Pluto, one of the furthest most planets out in the solar system, which has an orbit going from 30 astronomical units to 50 astronomical units. And oppositions and squares are very tense geometries. So we have this all happening. Also, if we do look at the archetypal significations for our signs here, Western Tropical, all occurring in fixed signs, which build tension. They don't release easily. But when they do, it's pretty sudden. It's not this mutable flow of water or anything like that. It's very akin to like an earthquake. Like it's here, it's fixed, and then if it does slip, now it's in a new fixed position, and the whole transition was very quick. Not this whole drawn out watery affair, or fluid, something like that. So this is the planetary geometry that's currently active right now, but we also have some other planets. We have currently Venus conjunct Saturn exactly, and on the lunar node. So we're talking about the moon here because we have the moon about to go conjunct the sun. That's a new moon. You won't see the moon at night because it's out during the day, conjunct the sun. And we have also this congregation, this alignment with Venus and Saturn at the same time. But we have this planetary geometry right now, third pass of it. And so it's kind of like the final conclusion of this. There's been this story building since November 3rd. And you'll remember that on back in November, we had quite a lot of solar activity. Really back in October we did. And that's when this opposition actually first started to build because it took time. Mars, again, moving very, very slowly. And so we've been in this story now. If we look at sunspots, they're starting to increase again. So let's check that out. Our sunspot numbers are going back up in a way that's kind of surprising, but they have not been flaring significantly. So we can check out our sunspots right here. Here we have Earth-facing sunspots going from the 21st of April to the 25th. And we see our sunspot graphic here going from March to April. This is the actual like finalized sunspot number for March, and we're still in the estimated sunspot number, but that'll get finalized by the end of the month. And we see that we hit this low there on the 15th. That's about 70 or so. Down here at the end of March, it was actually 50. That was because of that very large coronal hole, rotation number 7. We're on rotation number 8 right now. And what was interesting about rotation 7 is it didn't have all these sunspots clustered around it like we do now with rotation number 8. And so it really caused sunspot numbers to drop quite a bit. And this is then when we had a whole bunch of earthquakes pop off, the magnitude 7.7, Myanmar being the biggest. Now we see that we had a higher low for the sunspot numbers there on the 15th, and we actually had a higher high in terms of sunspots too. We went back to 200, where we haven't been for a while. And it's because of all the sunspots that we have on the Earth-facing side of the sun at this moment in time. We're just starting to have some rotate out of view right now. But there are like 12 different sunspot groups, which is quite surprising. And they are numbered, I mean, it's hard to, there's so many of them, it's hard to do it. But for example, this one, right, I think it's going to form up. Yeah, 4070 right there, formed pretty quickly. This is 4064. This is soon to be approaching that western limb. And so if it does any flaring, it's basically everything's been Earth-facing quiet. If that does any flaring, it'll be magnetically conjugate. Could give us a proton storm. We'll see. But in general, just a lot of sunspots, tiny ones, but all over, pumping out X-ray flux. And let's look at our X-ray flux because we haven't had any significant flares now for a while. So let's check it out. Let me just go right here. Here we have our X-ray flux for the past week. And so this is that tension that's building. Like we have all these sunspots, but no solar flares. We have this big coronal hole, like the biggest coronal hole that we've seen in like probably a decade or longer. No big earthquakes yet, just 3 magnitude 6+ earthquakes, a 6.2, and then another 6.2, and then a 6.3 just yesterday in Ecuador. But here we have our X-ray flux, and we see that we've only had some low-grade M-class flares back on like the 21st, 22nd. It's only been very low C-class activity since then. So the planetary geometry, based on my research and understanding, right? Do your own research, make your own conclusions. But the planetary geometry that we're in right now with this T-square, with the Sun, Mars, and Pluto, is indicating that there's something building tension-wise. And it's actually right now at that critical moment. We had the new moon again in about 24 hours as I'm doing this live stream right now, indicating some sort of new kind of beginning and potentially release of energy, because it's then going to activate that T-square pretty precisely. And new moons, if you just talk about the geophysics, they also have a tidal loading effect. So ocean tides, and also we know ocean tides, for example, are biggest during new moons and full moons, but also earth tides. So there's actual vertical displacement of the earth itself that occurs from the moon and the sun that reaches a maximum during new moons and full moons. And so we see this triggering of earthquakes by the moon. Also the other planets too. Some other people are doing really good research in terms of the planetary geometry and earthquake triggering, or at least the connection with them in time. It's pretty convincing. But we see in general, if we look across the entire earthquake record for our data, going back, I guess, to about 1950, even the 1900s, during new moons or full moons, you have like a 0.5 to 1% increase in earthquakes, but it's more statistically significant with the higher magnitude earthquakes. They do seem to cluster around the new moon or the full moon. So we have that tidal loading effect coming up in less than 24 hours, and that extends out for about 24, 48 hours around that new moon or full moon period. So we're in that right now. We haven't been having the solar flares, but in general, just having that many sunspots on the Earth-facing side of the sun is charging up the ionosphere, and they're kind of working to get opposite. The coronal hole high-speed stream and the ionosphere charging are kind of working opposite, because usually you see earthquake activity pop off when sunspot numbers go down, and for example, that high-speed stream hits, but right now we have sunspot numbers still elevated. So I think that something's building and brewing. The energy is not releasing perhaps as it normally does, but eventually it's going to find that outlet. And when that happens, I don't know what it's going to look like. The expression of that, it could be a big solar flare, it could be a big earthquake, it could be a big social unrest movement, right? Things of that nature. Just, we're talking more about this potential in like the quantum field. How that's going to manifest is a good question. But let us look at our Schumann data actually, because we just saw a big burst in the Schumann resonances, which is very, very interesting. So here we have our data out of Tomsk, Russia, by the Space Observing System for the past 3 days. And we're looking at the 0 to 40 hertz vertical electric field. So here we have our y-axis going from 0 hertz to 40 hertz. 1 hertz is 1 cycle per second, a waveform like this. 40 hertz is 40 cycles per second. Then we have our x-axis here, which is 3 days going across time. This is all universal time plus 7. So we had some really interesting data today, because we have this increase in the background vertical electric field basically across the entire frequencies that we're measuring here, but we had fair weather conditions in Tomsk. So typically when you see something like this, it's because there's been some rain nearby or overhead, a thunderstorm, snow, something like that. Or for example, they use a wire antenna, and so when there's wind blowing on that wire, you can induce these microphonics. We see that there. If you get these like horizontal lines that cut across, that's typically wind-induced noise. So it's just noise created by the wire, the antenna wire, basically vibrating in the wind, and it creates this, fake data, you could say. But here we have the weather conditions for today, and we see that, yeah, there were some clouds, but actually it got partly cloudy, partly sunny, you could say. Right there, temperature went up, pretty nice and hot, and no rain at all for the past 24 hours. Yet we get this big power burst, and actually the most significant of all this right there. This is microphonics, wind-induced noise. This could be, I think, a little bit of a combination of wind and probably rain as well. But here, again, fair weather conditions. We look at our amplitude down here. This is where it kind of gets interesting. We see mode 1 there going all the way up to 52. Is that 52? 53 relative amplitude, which is quite high. And we have mode 2 there, 14 hertz going up to 30. You see that they decrease in amplitude as you go down. But mode 4 kind of bucking the trend because it went up to 17 and it had this spike in its amplitude as the others started to go down. So we see that it followed this trend. Its amplitude was lower than all the others, but then it had this spike right at the very end. And this is the frequency, about 25, 26 hertz. That mode 4 of the Schumann resonances, is the one that typically responds to pre-earthquake activity and has these anomalous signatures that appears within it. And so we see that spike there. And actually, it almost looks like we see a parabola right there. And that's typically a pre-earthquake signature as well. I'm just seeing this right now for the first time, that parabola. Let me pull up the data on my end so I can see this a little bit more clearly. Yeah, a little bit. A little bit. We'll have to watch, and I'll be monitoring this pretty closely over the next 24, 36 hours to see what materializes. But yeah, that spike there in mode 4 is also kind of an unusual thing. So by its own, I wouldn't put too much weight on this, but you combine this with all the other things I've laid out, and I think it's interesting. One other thing to point out for people in the United States, some people, is that we do have a severe weather alert in place for the 28th of April, for Monday. And this is in this region of the United States. So an outbreak of severe weather is likely across portions of the Midwest and the upper Midwest. Large hail, severe wind gusts, and strong to intense tornadoes are likely. All severe hazards are possible, including strong to intense tornadoes, large hail over 2 inches diameter, strong wind gusts up to 75 miles per hour. And we see that region of highest intensity is right there. So some intense weather potentially headed towards that part of the United States. And we see this enhancement of severe weather after coronal hole high-speed stream impacts, which again, we are kind of entering the second round of that right now because of the sun. Let me pull that up specifically on the SDO Solar Dynamics Observatory website. We can look at a 211 angstrom view for the past few days, and we'll see this very clearly. Here we have our 211 angstrom view. There's this monster coronal hole again, rotation number 8, the biggest one yet. I think it's larger than rotation number 7. Rotation 7 was clustered more like going vertically. This one's definitely horizontal, but definitely bigger, especially if you include the northern extent of it here, nearly connecting up this way. But see how it kind of has this bottleneck right there? So we've had a reduction in the solar wind velocity. Solar wind density is still low though, still low, which is something that we've been talking about. But now we get this kind of second part of it, this and this rotating right now geoeffective. So we've been basically in a high-speed stream now for like a few days. It's going to probably be about a week long straight. And so it may be as that starts to wane out that we perhaps see some bigger effects from that, though we have already had 3 magnitude 6+ earthquakes. So let us check that out. We have our data from volcano discovery here, and we see our global seismic activity going back to basically early February. And you see that we were in this low, moderate activity for a while, right? For at least for 2025, basically it was like this all the way up until March with coronal hole rotation number 7, this global seismic burst. And you see that we are still in elevated activity as it relates to the 2 months prior. That's this magnitude 7.6 that occurred southwest of the Cayman Islands, but it's the only kind of standout. And at the very beginning of January, there was also a high magnitude earthquake. But even for basically, except for that, everything was like this low moderate activity. But you see how seismic activity has definitely been elevated since these coronal hole high-speed streams really got big. Because rotation 7 was big, rotation 8 was also what we're in right now, very, very large. This is the magnitude 6.2. I believe that was the Philippines. Was that the Philippines? We'll look at the USGS map. Then the 6.2 there in Turkey, right near Istanbul. And that fault has the potential to go to 7.5. And there's like this zipper action occurring along that fault. We'll look at that in a little bit. That the earthquakes have been migrating westward. So that could be a foreshock. There's a lot of talk about that now actually because of that magnitude 6.2 right near Istanbul, that fault may be ready to go. And then a magnitude 6.3 yesterday in off the coast of Ecuador. And then here's today, low activity today. But in general, it's pretty obvious to see that trend, especially you get the whole picture right there. Look at how once we had these coronal hole high-speed streams really get big and significant, earthquake activity definitely shifted dramatically, and I think we're still well within that. Let's go to our USGS map. For the past 7 days, we can check out these earthquakes here. So again, we haven't had the big release of earthquake energy that I feel like this coronal hole high-speed stream should have triggered. Again, the connection is not 100%. There's a lot of factors at play, but we have this new moon tidal loading force coming up again, 24, 36 hours. And so that is like something to be aware of. If, eventually we're going to have like a weighted probabilistic model of this with all the different inputs that will give us like some probability rating for earthquake activity. Probably within 5 years, we'll have that developed, I'd imagine, through the work and effort of things like this. That new moon coming in, just increases that probability. How much is hard to say, but we know it just kind of increases that percentage of something significant happening. But we do have these magnitude 6 earthquakes. Yeah, this one was the Philippines. That's right on. Yeah, Philippines. And then they had the one in Turkey here. And then just yesterday, we had the one in Ecuador there. That's the largest of the bunch. But the one in Turkey is the one that probably has the most people kind of worried because it also occurred with a variety of other quakes, 2 magnitude 5s. There's a magnitude 5 there. And there was another one as well right here. But if we look at our geology here, it's quite interesting. You have this, I guess I'll have to zoom out one more. We have this strike slip fault that actually runs north. This is a North Anatolia fault and strike slip. So it can have a magnitude up to about 7.5. And it has been having earthquakes progressively from here, about 1930, to like migrating westward. And the last big one was 1999. And then we had, of course, this 6.2 just a few days ago. But there's so many historic examples of there being, let's say, like a magnitude 6 or a magnitude 7. And then a few days later, you get the big one. Like in Japan, for example, 2011, there was a magnitude 7. A few days before that, magnitude 9.1. So like those dynamics exist. Did this release energy on that fault? Absolutely. But does that mean that it released all the energy that was built up on the fault? No, because a magnitude 7.5, for example, is a lot more energy than this 6.2. So that would just be a small like foreshock release if that is the case. It's not the highest probability, but people are looking at this very closely now and thinking, oh, at some point this is going to kind of, with this zipper function that it's kind of going through, eventually that part of the fault will release because this part released, that part released, that part released, that part released. And so the stress is still very high in this part of the North Anatolia fault. And it's right basically underneath Istanbul, which is a city of millions of people. And it can have a magnitude 7.5. That's a lot more destructive than a magnitude 6.2. Some people were injured by that 6.2, but there wasn't really much damage. Thankfully, it was a little bit further away from the city. It wasn't right underneath it. But a magnitude 7.5 in the same location could be very destructive. So we hope that does not happen. But people are now thinking that is more likely, looking at it very closely because of this magnitude 6.2 that just recently occurred. And so that's, again, another one of these things like the tension is there. And is it going to release? Like, where is this tension going to release? That's kind of an open question. But just kind of relying on my intuition a little bit, there seems to be something that's brewing, and I can't share exactly what. We also have our climate, our temperature anomaly map. I just want to quickly show you this because it's interesting. We have quite a significant anomaly as it relates to global temperature right now. Let's go back to our anomaly right there. We see massive heat wave across like the stands and going into the Middle East and then into Africa as well. And so they're recording like record hot temperatures right now in April. Kuwait registered temperatures nearly 49 Celsius, 48.9 degrees Celsius, which is like mind-blowing astronomical, especially for April. Really wild stuff. So here's like our global map for that, and I can change our display capture for that to show you a little better. And also big temperature anomalies in Antarctica right now as well, like really big ones. I can scroll up again to show you those. If I click through these, we'll see that eventually pop up. There it is. Look at our temperature anomalies in Antarctica, really large. And they're going into winter, keep that in mind, right? Southern Hemisphere, it's nearly basically winter solstice for them. And so this is quite significant because these anomalies are very significant. So just a lot of like kind of odd things. No guarantee that means anything, right? Again, like not Nostradamus, never claimed to be, but just pointing out some of the oddities that are existing right now. And I feel like they're kind of at opposite polarities of each other and that something is just kind of brewing. That's the best I got for you. We're just going to keep a close eye on this. So I'm your host, Stefan Burns. Subscribe to the channel if you want to stay up to date with that. I don't think there's anything else to really show you, except I want to show you this. Here we have our chronograph, and this is looking at the solar wind emitted from the sun. And we do have this strange feature that's also showing up right now in our C2 chronograph. So I'm just going to slide this for you. There's like this large plasma loop, a coronal loop, very large, that is like slowly releasing from the sun right there. See that? It's very slow. It's not like a normal coronal mass ejection because normally it would leave this close-up view very quickly. But this is just like slowly blasting off. And you don't really see it either in our actual imagery of the sun. So let's go back to that because normally you would see a feature like that show up on the sun and that would launch off, and we're not seeing that basically across our view. So here we have our sun, and this big like loop of plasma you imagine is going like this, right? Don't really see it. Don't really see it. I mean, we do start to see like a structure form right here. Do you see that kind of like going up? That might be what I'm talking about, but there's nothing really obvious with our close-up view of something launching from the northern hemisphere. Yet we very clearly see that with our chronograph here, with this like large plasma structure in the C2 view, and also just starting to show up in the C3 view. If we check this out, we see that it's just starting to appear right up here. See that? But it's very slow, which is bizarre. So there's a whole bunch of bizarre things happening right now. That's basically what I'm reporting on. And I think it's a little bit of like a mystery. And how it's going to, if something's going to express itself, how it's going to happen is kind of an unknown at this point. But the planetary geometry is very intense at this moment in time. As we discussed earlier, and we'll just get your eyes on it one more time with our planetary geometry right here. Again, Mars in its final and third opposition to Pluto right there. This time though, square to the sun, moon coming in to conjunct the sun in less than 24 hours, further activating all of that. Actually, the moon really kind of bringing it closer to home because Pluto's way out there. Mars, is close to Earth, but again, it's not like as close the moon is, right? The moon is very close to us. So it can kind of be like the shepherd, you could say, just like bringing that energy in and then delivering it to Earth because it's the closest to us and has significant gravitational and electromagnetic effects. The sun, of course, at the center of the solar system, And also there, again, Venus conjunct Saturn on the lunar node, the north node. So there's this kind of energy matrix that exists right now. So that's everything I got for you. Kind of unusual, odd times, but something's brewing. That's what I feel. We don't know how it's going to resolve itself, whether it's some big solar activity or perhaps some earthquake activity, volcanic activity, or something more societally with us. An interesting point, you know, this all affects not just like the geophysics of our planet, but also like the expression of our collective consciousness and society and more, because you can actually plot the oppositions now with Mars and Pluto. And just an example, this is one example of probably a ton that you could do, but they line up perfectly with increases in the cryptocurrency market, which is interesting. So around November 3rd was the first one. We had a huge pump in the crypto market with that first opposition. Then on with the second one, the retrograde one, there was also a significant price pump. And now on the third one, there's also been significant price movement in the crypto market in the days just before this third opposition. So that's just an example of how these energies maybe aren't causative, but these things happen at the same time. Perhaps there's a deeper quantum reason for this, right? Something manifesting out of the quantum realm of potential. But if you can't really look at that to understand what may happen, you can forecast astrology out and astronomical placements out, because we know the velocities of the planets, their orbits, and so this is something that you can look out in time to get a sense of what's coming. So I would just like to remind people that I have an e-course on planetary resonances that is available on my website at wildfreeorganic.com/planetary resonances. This is 15 hours of video content where we basically go into every single planet, its archetypal signatures, its different characteristics in terms of like how far away it is from the sun, the light that receives from the sun, its planets and moons and all this stuff, right? The astrology and the archetypal characteristics. Then we talk about the synodic cycles of the planets. For example, we have our Venus star cycle here. Venus does 13 orbits for every 8 that the Earth does, which is a Fibonacci sequence. We talk about the synodic cycles of the outer planets, so Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, the really big synodic cycles. Also look at the timing of the synodic cycles across like 2,000–3,000 years. We talk about precession of the equinoxes and cosmic cycles, the great year, which is like a 26,000 year long cycle, the astrological ages. We just go into depth in different centaurs like Chiron and Chariklo and discuss comets and more. So 15 hours of video content presented by me, like on camera. We go through everything. We spend like 2 hours on the moon. So if you want to learn about eclipses and the lunar nodes and all that stuff, that course is awesome. Again, it's available at wildfreeorganic.com/planetary-resonances. And I know you'll love that. If you like these sort of videos on the channel and you want to better understand when I do these presentations on planetary geometry and resonances and more, that guide, that e-course will get you 100% up to speed and more. We cover a lot of things there that you won't find covered basically anywhere else, to the best of my knowledge. I mean, it's not like no one else covers this, but it's a very comprehensive resource, and it's sometimes difficult to make videos on some of these topics because they just don't have the public interest, though perhaps you think they should, right? But if you go through that entire course, you'll learn some of the stuff that you probably wouldn't otherwise if you're just, let's say, scrolling through YouTube, because they're more focused on current events, things of this nature. But the Planetary Resonances e-course is awesome. So you can go and check that out by clicking this box up there, or you can watch a relevant video down here. Again, I've been your host, Stefan Burns. Thank you all so much for watching and wishing all of you well. Hopefully everything stays calm, cool, and collected, but looks like something's brewing, and I'll keep you up to date every step of the way. So please subscribe, and I'll see you all very soon.